The inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. This has been a busy and eventful week around Cincinnati City Hall. Early in the week, Council received the latest update on the gaping $870 million gap in the city's underfunded retirement program. Then on Tuesday, the Ohio Appeals Court reversed Judge Winkler's March judgment that the city had improperly used the emergency clause to monetize the parking system. Then on Thursday night, the 4 declared candidates for mayor of Cincinnati met in their first public debate. To try to help us understand all the moving parts, I am joined this morning by Yvette Simpson, a Democrat in her first term on City Council. Ms. Simpson is an attorney and is currently completing an MBA program at Xavier and has fact skipping class in order to do this. And Christopher Smitherman, an independent who is completing his second term on council. Mr. Smitherman owns and runs a financial planning practice. Both of you, welcome back.
Thank you,
Newsmakers, and thank you for making the extra step in all seriousness. The news about the pension situation isn't new. We've been dealing with this for some time. Yvette, let's begin with you. What is it, when you hear the reports that were being made this week, what is it that you think has to be done in order to address this? Because we really have, even though we've known about it, we really haven't addressed it. What do you think we have to do?
I think we're really at a point where we have to have a couple different options, and I don't think there's one size fits all. And that's been kind of the challenge as a new council member introduced to kind of the challenges with the pension plan in my first year. You know, we have this big unfunded liability. We've got to find $85 million, which is what it is this year. It was a little different last year, not that far off. And my perspective was, I don't see that in the budget. So it left me with, okay, there's this big thing we've got to do. We can't do that, so what do we do? And so we took a few steps, and we've seen kind of some of the benefit of that, but it's not enough. And so the question is, what do we do now? And so from my perspective, if someone who's really new, and I see this big kind of pot, we've got a operating deficit, so we don't have $85 million to put in it. My question is, what are the combination of things that we can do to make this problem slowly move towards, you know, something that is workable, as opposed to continuing to say, we need $85 million, we need $85 million. We don't have it in cash to be able to contribute today.
Well, Christopher, is there even a plan? I mean, it's one thing if you know that's out there, and you've created a plan to deal with it over a long period of time. But is there even a plan? And if not, what are the elements of that plan? What's it got? I'm sure all of you kind of know what the key elements have to be. How would you answer that?
Well, Dan, first, thank you for having me on. We started in 2004 with about an $80 million unfunded liability that has now grown to $870 million. Last year, we escalated about $157 million. There has to be an infusion of cash, in my opinion, to deal with the $85 million annual payment.
Yeah, we're at such large numbers. It's not just picking at the edges.
No. So I believe that once we have to go out and ask for some pension obligation bonds while interest rates are incredibly low. Other municipalities have done this. It hasn't worked in some, it's worked in others, but the interest rates were very different when those other municipalities took those bonds out. So while interest rates are low, I think it's very important that we go out, whether it's $100 million, whether it's $400 million, there needs to be a present value infusion of cash in order to bring down the annual payment of $85 million per year that we need to make to bring that deficit down.
For those of us who don't live in the financial world, by going out and issuing the bonds, you're borrowing.
That's correct.
How does that solve anything?
Well, what happens here is, let's say the interest rate that we're able to capture is 3%. And let's say we go out and we bring in $100 million. Now, there's going to be a discussion about whether we turn it over to our current investment advisors, but let's assume that we do. The goal would be to obviously beat that interest rate that we're getting of 3 or 4% in the bonds, like we got a 12% return last year. The $85 million, which is now 53% of our payroll, we just, as Council Member Yvette Simpson has indicated, we can't afford. So we've got to bring the $85 million down to around $30 million in order for us to be able to, on a sustained basis, meet that annual responsibility for the city.
Besides doing something like that, going out and borrowing at low interest rates, which that window may close.
It's closing now.
You know, so what other things can be done? Are there other things that can be done?
You know, we took one step last year, in my first year when we were first evaluating this, and we increased kind of our annual percentage of the payroll that we were contributing, and we agreed to do that on a stair-step basis so we could adjust to the reality of our budget. And one of the things that, I know we're going to talk about the parking plan, that the parking plan would have allowed us to do, those proceeds was to advance to the full 24% earlier, which would have contributed an additional $1.4 million on top of what we would contribute every year as a percentage of payroll. I'm certainly on board with that, and maybe even increasing a little bit more, considering the fact that we've got a little bit more in the parking plan to work with, considering the cuts that we just made. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how we might be able to use some of the parking plan proceeds to put a little bit of money in our pension. But we've also got to look at benefits, and it's a tough conversation to have. And I don't know what that looks like. I think we've got to have a lot of public engagement. We got to bring the people who are going to be affected by it to come in. My understanding is that
retirees.
Right. My understanding is that we adjusted benefits in '99 when we were overfunded, or we were closer to fully funded, and then the individuals who were retiring at that time during that window had what they call the Cadillac of benefits, if you will. That's not realistic for us now. I've always said that I don't want to do anything to jeopardize current retirees, but we might be jeopardizing current retirees if there's a risk that we're not going to be able to fund their pensions at all. And so that balance is something that I'm willing to look at, but we have to make the first step, and we have to be aggressive in giving a little bit more if we're going to ask the employees to do that too.
Part of the thing that the city failed to do is, when the market was giving us great returns, we also were underfunding the pension. We were taking, you know, looking at the market and saying we're now going to slack off on those payments. So one of the things we also have to commit ourselves, no matter what the market is doing, that we maintain our obligation, our annual contribution to the pension. We never go back to those days where we were using the market to offset our annual contribution to the pension, Dan. And I think that's a philosophy that council is going to have to accept. Before looking at benefits for those who are retired, one, I think there's going to be a healthy debate about it. I think those people who are already retired, I'm very cautious about bothering their benefits. Looking at those who are currently working, I say that we have to find a class where we're all comfortable, carve them out, and make some decisions on those benefits. It's hard for me to take that step if the city doesn't take its step. So that's why I keep saying we need to show the retirees that we're willing to make that sacrifice, make the contribution that we need to make by infusing a present value, some cash in, and also make a real commitment to meeting our obligation to the retirees.
Who realistically on council, in the administration, needs to take the leadership on putting this sort of complex plan together?
I think that our pension director, and we've requested that. We requested that in the last meeting. She's in the position to be able to evaluate what the actuary tells us, which is, I need all the money and I need it right now. What the investment manager says, I can invest it, I can make it grow, which, you know, both of those is their perspective, and the truth is somewhere in the middle there. To really be able to understand the policy that we're articulating, which is we don't want to have to disrupt current retirees. Is there a way to make this work out without doing that? Because I think we all agree we don't want to have to do that. Is there a way to carve out a class, as Councilmember Smitherman is saying, that will get us to the place where we can correct it? And if there is a reasonable amount of money that we can infuse, and I'm still out of the door on pension obligation bonds, it feels like we're playing roulette a little bit with that, so I'm a little nervous. But is there a place where we can find a nice, comfortable place to infuse some cash, maybe with the parking proceeds or something else, so that we can make that balance out?
Dan, I just want to make the point to your watchers, people who are watching this, that the taxpayer, those who are retired, and the workers are all in this together. The city has a 60% of that unfunded liability is directly attributable to the taxpayer. So it's not like the taxpayer is off the hook. Those that are watching this are saying, well, I'm not a retiree, I don't work for the city, this has nothing to do with me. The fire department and the police department, as you know, have different systems, but what we're talking about impacts them ultimately, and that's why you're highlighting it for the public. This is a very serious discussion. Stockton, California, 300,000 citizens, a $900 million unfunded liability, and they filed Chapter 9. So the city is going to have to get very serious, and my colleagues, all of us are going to have to come up with a plan to try to resolve this issue.
Let's take a look now, because I think ultimately these two issues could be related in some way. The parking proposal back in February and March was to monetize the parking assets of the city, have the Port Authority take it over, raise a lot of money with sort of infusion, $92 million, which would be addressed in a variety of ways. Okay, that was stopped on an appeal to the courts. The argument was that it was passed as improperly as an emergency legislation. And now this week, the appeals court said, no, the city acted properly. Now, I'm sure that's going to get appealed, and it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and okay. But where we are right now, let's assume that this is going to go forward, just for the moment. Or let's assume we're in this situation. What do you recommend that the city do? Is the deal still on the table to be signed by the city and the port? And if so, do you think it should be? Yvette?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
So I want to make sure I answer both questions. You know, clearly, Councilmember Smitherman and I are on different sides of this issue. I respect his perspective completely. Mine is just a little different. I supported the parking plan. I supported our use of the emergency clause. I also articulated that I thought it was an appropriation and it should have not been subject to referendum because of that reason as well. I think that 5 members of council have spoken. The judge has said we've done that. At least the most recent ruling is that we've done that within the bounds of the law and our
So you think we should proceed?
I think that we should. I mean, I think that what we have to send to the community is a message, and this is something we struggle with in Cincinnati. When we do something, it gets done. That there's not 10 years of back and forth about whether we do it or not. And a decision was made, and so you move forward with that decision. So I think that we should.
Before I throw this over to Christopher, because I know you have a different position, but let me add another element to this, and that is Lori Quinlivan, from what I understand, she voted for it. She's now saying we shouldn't go ahead with, so it may change the dynamic of that vote. But what do you think the city should do?
Well, one, when the stub budget was passed, there was a concept about a parking bill. We had about a week and a half to digest ultimately this $100 million deal with $550 million of revenue going out of the city of Cincinnati. The $3 million that we talk about often is just not guaranteed, Dan. So at the heart of this, I am concerned about whether this is a good deal or not. You know, I would have liked to have seen a deal where we shared in revenue over a 30-year period. There was no lump sum revenue up front to plug the operating budget for a couple of years. I would have liked to have seen an option of the city actually running the asset themselves and prioritizing it. Where we go from here is there's going to be a continued legal battle around it. I don't think that the manager or the mayor will have the authority to sign this in the next month or so. I think there's going to be an appeal to the House Supreme Court, whether they will hear it or not.
Right. They don't have to hear it.
They don't have to hear it, or they don't have to hear it. And if they don't hear it, then I would assume that the manager will sign the agreement. Now, if $92 million comes into the city, which is your question,
right,
then I think that we should be prioritizing our pension obligation.
Okay, that's exactly where I was going.
And that the proceeds should not be spent for what I consider pet projects, but they should be honed in on what I think is the crisis that the city is facing, which is our pension obligation.
How do you feel about that?
The last part or the whole part?
The last part. Because the original plan was to use that money for other development purposes.
Right.
The
and
new tower and all that kind of stuff.
I believe you've got to strike a balance, right? So whenever you take an upfront lump sum, you can invest it in places that will grow faster than if you took an annual That's using the time value of money. You can do that. And so I believe that a combination of shoring up our financial stability, and let's be clear about the fact that the budget that we balanced is not structurally balanced. Not only that, but it puts a lot of the obligation into next year, which is the second half of our biennium. We've got to correct some of that. And we have to think about how we do that with this source of funds. I would like to see a plan that allows us to be structurally balanced by 2017, using the proceeds strategically and investing in some growth that we can see over the next 3, 5, 7 years in the way of jobs and increased revenue. But I do think we need to shore up the pension plan as much as we can with this infusion of cash. So we agree with that. To what degree we do that and how we balance that interest versus investing in some places where we can see continued growth over the next 10, 15 years, I think that's the question.
I would think that the banks, and again, I'm not a finance person. You're much closer to this kind of thing than I am. But I would think the banks would be much more favorable to the bonds that you were suggesting to help with the pension, if the city was willing to put a significant amount of sort of a windfall into this and behind it and say, we really want to get on top of this program. Is that fair?
No, that's very fair. And I think that in order for us to continue talking about balancing the budget, we should act like the parking revenue doesn't exist. Just like we did in this current budget, and police and fire were not laid off. I think that if we act like the asset doesn't exist, like many of our households have to do when they get windfalls of money, we'll have a better outcome. I'd like to be a lot more conservative with the asset, because once the asset is spent, it's gone, Dan. It's gone for life. And again, the $3 million that we talk about over 30 years is never guaranteed. That is not a guaranteed number.
Let me raise this, though. Originally, a big part of that was going to go to this new tower at 4th and Race. For a time, the parking assets went away.
Yes.
Now they're back, but just before this court decision, it was announced we were going to go ahead with the tower. Yeah. And we found the money from other sources. Yeah. How do you put all those pieces together?
I think that's just the reality of the way things happen. You've got a lot of projects going on at the same time. We didn't find the money. We took a project that was already going to be funded from urban renewal tax credits, and we put that money, which was supposed to be used for a hotel, which I still think we need, because our convention business is growing and we need a solid hotel to be able to make sure that we have a place where people can come and stay, because that's business for us. So we took the money that was supposed to be used for that and we used it for this project because it was time sensitive. The developers wanted to move forward with it. It's something that we wanted to do. That happens every day. I mean, it happens all the time. The timing of all kinds of things. And so what we have to do is ask ourselves now that we don't need that resource, do we go forward with a hotel project? And if so, where does that money come from?
Less than 30 seconds.
The TIF dollars are being used to do the pole garage. So that means that it's going to put a strain on completing the bank's project. So there are choices that we have to make. My frustration is that the administration, Dan, doesn't put all those choices on the table so that we can say yes or no to the choice. We get one option, which is what frustrates me all the time.
Thank you very much. It's been a great discussion. Lots of pieces going on. Welcome back. Every summer, there's opportunities for children to come together and get some services they need and work together, have fun together. And one of the things this summer in the new Washington Park is the Hope Fest Elementary Education and Health Festival, which is June the 29th this year, June the 29th in the park. And I am joined this morning by Sherman Bradley, who is the founder, CEO, and any other title you want to throw in there to consider the poor. Sherman, of course, has been a guest on this show many times. He is long time was the vice president at City Gospel Mission, and we've talked about many topics. Sherman, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Thank you for having me.
So, Hope Fest Elementary Education and Health Festival. What is this? Who's this for?
This is for, obviously, children primarily in the elementary and junior high age brackets, specifically tackling health concerns as well as education, very different aspects of the health, and then the health that's directly related to how their educational experiences are going. For instance, providing access to health inside of the schools is assisting some of the dynamics that keep children from attending school. We're bringing the children to the park, doing even a pilot last year. We found that a third of them, 1 out of every 3, were attending ER, rather than having a local clinic or a service provider that can provide them not only the care for whatever they're ailing, but to work toward preventative measures as well. So this event allows us to bring, with Children's Hospital Medical Center, Crossroads Clinic, the West End Clinic, Good Sam Clinic on the west side, to bring the services to the community in a fun, festive opportunity for them to engage the services.
Well, this whole thing about children and access to health care has been dramatically demonstrated time and again, but especially came home to me visiting the new Euler School, the rebuilt Euler School that has the eye clinic and the dental clinic and health services and psychology counseling services, and what they have discovered about children in the inner city and the lack of health care, and then how that affects their ability to perform in school. It's just absolutely astounding.
They're inseparable. Both have to be tackled simultaneously.
So at the Hope Fest festival itself, all those organizations will be there, but what happens? I mean, they'll be providing, actually get services there?
They will be providing basic care. Cincinnati Smiles will be there tackling dental, but they'll be hearing and speech. There will be questionnaire for individuals to fill out that will give us some data on their issues regarding obesity and diabetes and mental health, to asthma, and a few other things that they'll actually get information to take with them. They'll get service providers that will be there from Children's that will provide some care right there on the spot based upon certain aspects that they will be able to take care of. Some things they will have referrals that they can then set a date and actually go to the hospital or to one of the clinics to actually get seen. Last year we found out that some of the children weren't having their asthma inhalers, or they did not realize they may be an asthma candidate, and other things that they were learning through this process. We'll continue to learn and then look toward preventative measures in the future. How can we be more proactive with this demographic to assist them and lessen the number of folk who wind up in ER, which we know is an astronomical cost to the hospital, and is passed on to us as the taxpayer.
Well, you mentioned diabetes, this whole link between juvenile obesity and diabetes, and the spread of type 2 diabetes among younger and younger people is really frightening and very costly. So that would be a focus. So is there going to be a focus on diet and all of the questions about diabetes and obesity? Is that a major focus here?
It is, and the Christ College has a nursing division that's actually going to be on site with students that are specifically targeting health and nutrition. They're even going to provide a recipe or a booklet of recipes on healthy nutrition and healthy meals that families can actually fix for themselves, as well as sharing how to actually acquire the right products in a grocery store and what does it mean to actually utilize those products. We take for granted that individuals who may not have been taught this know it already, so they have to be taught as well.
Yeah. So how many people, Washington Park's a big place.
It's a big place.
How many people, this is only your second year, last year was kind of a pilot.
Correct.
How many people do you think might be attending, and do people who want to come, do they have to do anything to make reservations, or can they literally just show up?
They can literally show up. And so we have been contacting the rec homes and the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Clubs and using CPS and its internal channel of communication to let the families and the children know that these services will be provided for them, and there'll be some giveaways for the children as well. The Cincinnati Reds will be there giving things away. There'll be some other businesses that will be there. The fire department will be there. The police department will even be there with their canine and mounted patrols doing community service. There'll be some mascots, some fun mascots there that the children will love as well. And there'll be clowns, face painting, balloon caricatures, so on and so forth.
All of that sort of thing that goes along with summer festivals and stuff.
The kids will love as well.
So what kind of number are you hoping for?
Our goal is at least 600 children, and that's not counting families that will be connected to them. And last year, because of the park being such an attraction, there were hundreds of people that were there coming through who weren't necessarily there for the services, but participating in some of the activities that were there as well. Because we wanted the community to be involved, because we're also educating the community on what's taking place with this demographic so that they can look at how can they be a part of the process for healing.
So the Hope Fest, the festival itself, is sort of a kickoff for a much broader initiative.
Absolutely. The actual research that's being done on the day, Children's is taking back, continuing to figure out how can we get funding to do in between events leading up to this annual event, and how can we continue to provide the information necessary toward preventative care and not just tackling the needs.
So just to make sure that people know, is there a way for people online to see more about the Hope Fest, and where do they go?
Yes. Well, first you can contact me if you want to volunteer at 513-615-2201, and you can go to the Hope Fest Facebook page, or Consider the Poor's Facebook page, and considerthepoor.org is the website where you can learn more information as well.
Sherman, I'm sure this is going to be a big draw, big success, and it's just your latest and newest initiative. You've got boundless energy, and thank you very much for everything you do.
All right, appreciate it.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the men and the women shaping our community for the future. Have a good week.